It sort of naturally emerged where a lot of ecofeminists, environmental activists, women in charge of that, were starting to reclaim witchcraft themselves in their own way, explicitly in a protest. Hello, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Dr. Corey Wren, and I am a vegan sociologist, a vegan feminist, and I'm also, out of the broom closet, I also identify as a vegan witch. And if you don't know anything about witchcraft, that's what this video is all about. So don't be weirded out. Witchcraft is sort of like, it's sort of a feminist, not for everybody, for me anyway, it's a sort of feminist subculture for people who are interested in reconnecting with nature, reconnecting with the earth, and finding power in that connection. So people practice witchcraft in lots of different ways. They may cast spells, which is really just intention setting, and sometimes using tools like candles, or gemstones or crystals or whatever else. Doesn't have to be that though. Some people just use a lot of meditation. Some people do it in groups. Some people do it on their own. But it's just basically, it's pagan folk magic, pagan folk practice. And it's a global heritage. I am from Appalachia, so that means that my heritage is Scot-Irish. And I'm currently living in Canterbury, England, where there were people killed for witchcraft. So it's definitely part of my legacy as a white woman from the Celtic British Isles. I'm currently living in Britain. But it's found all over the world. It's obviously found in the Americas. It's found in Africa, the continent, Asia. It's a global experience. But witchcraft, as I understand it, is sort of reimagining of old ancient paths that we may have walked with nature, with one another, with the cosmos, and with other animals. And since the 1950s, when witchcraft was finally repealed, the outlaw against witchcraft was finally repealed in the UK, it just so happened to be around the same time as the rise of counterculture in the UK and the US and elsewhere. And this is a time when people are starting to pay a little bit more attention to what's going on with the earth, pollution, climate change would come a lot later. It was happening, but people weren't really aware of it yet. But they were aware of pollution. They were aware of deforestation and the loss of all these amazing natural spaces. And this was also the rise of veganism, vegetarianism, animal rights, feminism, disability rights, indigenous rights, etc., and the civil rights movement, of course. So it was a really heady time in the mid-20th century where people were starting to push back on the so-called modern project and realize we may have gained quite a lot as far as knowledge, science, technology, and ease of living, but look at all the things we have also lost along the way. So witchcraft kind of emerges out of that as part of this alternative counterculture lifestyle. And in the UK, it started out as being quite, not feminist, just kind of gender neutral, if you will. It was really reignited by a mixture of men and women. So people like Gerald Gardner, who created Wicca. Wicca is like this modern indigenous religion that was created, in the 1940s and 50s. Which is based on, by the way, if you're interested, you don't know the history of Wicca, it's based on a lot of British folklore, paganism, but also he borrows quite a bit from other parts of the world. It's a bit of a conglomeration. There's also Maxine and Alexander Sanders, who were very active in the 1960s. Alex has since died, but Maxine, his partner, is still active in the witchcraft community. And many other people who were involved in this. But it wasn't really a feminist cause. It was just people trying to reclaim a lost heritage where now paganism, which was such a long part of British life, had been basically outlawed. And people had been terrorized, punished, even killed for practicing the old ways. Now in the mid-20th century, people were starting to reclaim that heritage. So trying to reimagine and reclaim these lost heritages, belief systems, deities, seasonal celebrations. Healing was a major part of British witchcraft of the mid-20th century. Was how can we use this for healing? So spiritual healing or physical healing, community ritual work, herbalism, healthy eating, healthy living, etc., etc. Lots of overlap, by the way, with the rising natural foods movement and the vegetarian movement and the back to nature movement and all those types of things. However, in the United States, it was a whole different business. In the United States, it sort of naturally emerged where a lot of ecofeminists, environmental activists, women in charge of that, were starting to reclaim witchcraft themselves in their own way, explicitly in a protest and explicitly in a feminist and an eco-sensitive way. This is not to say that the British witchcraft had nothing to do with that. Actually, in Britain, there were a few people who emigrated over to the United States and were really influential in seeing a rise in witchcraft in the United States. But in the US, I need to be clear here, it was explicitly feminist for the most part, because the feminists took a hold of this. They recognized that the symbol of the witch was such a powerful symbol of cultural, historical, political misogyny. And what if, in these years, these heady protest years, we took the ultimate symbol of women's denigration, flipped it, and recognized the power in it? And in fact, the symbolism of the witch is so incredibly potent. I mean, I could do a whole video on that. So activists of the time recognized that. They said, actually, shaming women for living alone? No. This is women empowered. Shaming women for being connected to nature? No, this is women empowered. Shaming women for knowing how to heal and being in touch with their bodies? You have to remember that women have been actively disconnected from their own bodies for centuries, right? So that's a source of power. Having relationships with other animals. That was a major reason for witchcraft persecution, especially in the UK. If women were thought to be communicating with animals, living with animals, helping animals, feeding animals, cohabitating with animals, that could make you a witch and you could be put to death. And also, many animals were put to death because they were supposedly in league with witches and the devil. So in the mid-20th century, that was also seen as a source of power. So here's where I come in. As an American myself, I'm growing up in a culture where, actually, I'm a child of I was born in the 80s, early 80s, and I grew up in the 90s, and that's when we started to see a resurgence in witchcraft in popular American culture and media. So The Craft, excellent film. Sabrina the Teenage Witch that came on Nickelodeon. Stevie Nicks, come on, Stevie Nicks' whole thing was like the witchcraft vibe, even though she later disowned it, but in her early career, that was a major part of it. And in the early 90s, Fleetwood Mac was having a resurgence. The 1997 album, The Dance, was all over TV. So it's now becoming popular. So that's what I have there, this new wave of witchcraft where it's no longer seen as something scary, weird, out there. It's becoming normal, a normal part of American culture. And now as I start to learn more about witchcraft, being an American, I'm starting to learn more about this environmental ethic, this feminist ethic that is imbrued in American witchcraft that maybe has gotten a bit lost by the resurgence of popular witchcraft in the 1990s and even today. So a lot of witchcraft today, the witch talk and the witch Instagram, is sort of devoid of politics. But the American witchcraft resurgence was actually very much so a political act. And there were activist groups that formed to be witches in service of social change. So there's a long, long legacy of that. So I talk about all of this in my book. If you're interested in learning the history of witchcraft and why it's feminist, that's basically the gist of it. I wanted to give this sort of short talk about, well, if you've been following my work for a while, and maybe you're coming to this video after you've checked out quite a lot of the other videos from my mainstream vegan feminist work, and then you're wondering, well, what the heck is this other book, Vegan Witchcraft? Like, who is this weirdo? Hopefully now after watching this, you realize it's not just me, this weirdo with candles, but someone who has... it takes a lot of bravery, basically, to come out as a witch, because I'm employed with a university, and what will students think? If you're one of my students, please be kind. But let me now talk about why I've decided to write the book and why I've decided to be open as the author of that book about my own personal background in witchcraft. So the history of it is in a nutshell is this. When I was a young person, as I was just saying, in the 1990s, I got into witchcraft, did the candles. By the way, like I said at the beginning of the video, there's lots of different ways to practice witchcraft. And I just happen to be one who's attracted to candles. So I used to do that quite a bit when I was a young person, and I had the books, the spell books and all that. And also as a young person, I was becoming a vegetarian. I became vegetarian at the age of 13. And I was involved in environmentalism from a very early age as well. Many of my first jobs were involved with working out in Forest Service or the state parks. So all these things were kind of commingling for me. I had a social justice spirit, even as a young person. But I was also thinking about how much I want to help animals, I want to help the environment, and how much I'm attracted to this witchcraft, not knowing at the time that really witchcraft is an embodiment of all those things, and also what would come into my consciousness later, the feminist aspect. I didn't really get radicalized as a feminist until much later into in my 20s. I was one of those people who was fooled into thinking we're living in a post-feminist world and we don't need feminism anymore. Boy, was I wrong. So that was my history with it. I left witchcraft behind for a bit there because I went off to university to study more serious pursuits. And then when I got out of university and got my first full-time university position, and I was living alone, and I guess for the first time I was an adult. At that time I was in my early 30s. I was living on my own, could do what I wanted. And and I think this is the experience for a lot of people in their 30s. You just feel like, who cares anymore? I can do what I want. So I came back to witchcraft and started to really embrace it as part of my life. And really just basically got annoyed because at this point I'd been vegan for many, many years. I was specializing in veganism. I'd written books on veganism, and I was just getting annoyed because witchcraft is supposed to be about an empowering, respectful, reciprocal relationship with other animals in nature. And what I was seeing was that animals were just being used as symbols, tokens, ingredients, and not really being taken seriously as individuals and persons. And by my late 30s, I was really getting annoyed by it, to the point where I was starting to think about maybe I should write a book about this. And I thought that, well, who's going to want to publish this? But I figured I'd put it on the shelf. I'd come back to that later in my career, and maybe I'd tinker a little bit with it in the meantime. However, I was approached by a publisher, and I was working on other books, notably vegan feminism, and also a book on vegan sociology. And so I wanted to prioritize those, and I wanted to save those for what I would call serious publishers. And this other publisher, which is more of a for-profit academic publisher, Routledge, did approach me, and they were quite persistent. And so finally I said, well, I didn't want to give them my other books, which are going to take a lot more like academic effort to really get into. So I said, well, you know what, how about my witchcraft book? Because this to me was just a topic I wanted to write about out of passion, not because I thought it would, create waves in the academic space. I wrote it because I felt like it needed to be written, and it was really starting to annoy me, and I needed to get these ideas out. And actually, surprisingly, Routledge was extremely interested in it, and hence offered me a contract. And so that launched me on to a good 2 years of intense research into all of the foundational texts in modern witchcraft, and quite a few of recent publications. I couldn't do all of them because there are just so many. Witchcraft is very unique because it's a pop culture sort of phenomenon. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of pop books published on this every single year. You can't possibly keep up with them all. So instead, what I did is I went and looked at the foundational books, and then I looked at some of the books that were specific to either the ethics of witchcraft, witchcraft as a social movement, or witchcraft looking at animal magic. And that helped to narrow it down quite a bit. So I was looking at dozens and dozens and dozens of books, stacks and stacks of them. And so I can pretty much say I have a good saturated knowledge of witchcraft ethics. And unfortunately, although I was pretty pleased to see that although witchcraft doesn't always identify itself as a social movement, I think it's pretty clear that it has been involved with social movements. It is a social movement. It's about social change. It's about empowering women, protecting nature. Historically, like I said, it doesn't always identify in that way, but definitely after the first Earth Day in the 1970s, the witchcraft movement pretty much shifted over to being a very environmentally focused movement. And so that was a very consistent theme, that you see witchcraft as environmentalist. Now, by the late 70s, with the rise of American witchcraft, the British witchcraft scene is now starting to come around to feminism. They were a bit hesitant at first, resistant. But now I think we're looking back over 50, 60 years of resurgence of popular witchcraft, and I think it's pretty clear that most mainstream witchcraft is environmentalist in leaning, and also, if not feminist, then very interested in uplifting women and empowering women and seeing women and giving women a voice and allowing women to take leadership and power positions. So in a way, kind of backdoor feminism. It's feminism in one way or another. What I did not find, however, was a consistent commitment to other animals, as I said. So that's what the heart of the witchcraft book is like looking at this body of work and trying to figure out, well, where do animals fit in there? Unfortunately, animals are not really taken seriously like the environment and women are. But the other aspect about why I came to this, and this is the journey, right? So I started off practicing when I was young, came back to it in my 30s. Now I'm in my early 40s at the time of this recording. And one of the things about witchcraft is that it is not just a theory, it is a craft, right? It's meant to be practiced. It's daily ritual. It's regular ritual. And I can say as a sociologist, that's one of the draws to it. It's something that you can reliably, physically, or mentally do on a regular basis to add some regularity, predictability to your life and create a sense of soothing. It's very meditative. It's very intention setting. It's grounding. All of these things are not just interesting if from, say, a spiritual position. And by the way, I don't really identify as spiritual or religious. I'm an atheist. But as a social movement scholar, all those things also seem very relevant to what people need to sustain themselves as healthy activists. So this is why I started pushing vegan witchcraft, not just writing it in the book and then sticking it on a shelf, never to be seen again. Pushing this as something that needs to be alive, engaged with, performed. It's not just enough to have a critique in our mind. I think we need to actually think about how can we put it into practice. So this is really core to feminist theory in general, not just witchcraft, but also feminist theory. Feminist theory historically has differentiated itself from generic mainstream or manstream theory, saying that it's not enough to just create the theory, we have to live the theory, we have to practice the theory. So how then can we envision this critique of witchcraft, not just being a critique, but also creating the alternative? What is the alternative? The alternative is using magical practice to sustain you. It's a practice of self-care. It's a practice of setting intention. What's the world that we want to see? And also, it shapes our everyday behavior. If you want to see a world that is peaceful, that is healing, that is healed, killing other animals, eating other animals, using other animals for wax candles or for skulls on your altar, or killing lambs so that you can have an Imbolc or Ostara dead animal feast, like that's not world peace. That's not the world that I'm fighting for. And if witchcraft really is all about encouraging us to reclaim our human heritage as animals on this earth and this ecosystem, killing other animals, animal sacrifice should have no place in that. So this is what makes vegan witchcraft, I think, a feminist practice. It's not just about, well, let's read the theory and critique the theory. It's like actually doing something. So if you are a vegan, you can benefit from this by thinking about where you are in this ecosystem and where you are in this as a human animal. The vast majority of the human life on Earth has been in symbiosis with other animals. We only took up hunting a few thousand years ago. Before that, we lived amongst and with and cooperatively with other animals. If you are a witch, Too often we see that witches focus on that brief patriarchal history of humanity when we started to domesticate animals, hunt animals, sacrifice animals, and we lose track of the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years where humans, being apes, ate plant-based and lived amongst and with and cooperatively with other animals rather than dominating and killing them and consuming them. So for witches, I think that if we really want to embrace that connection, that really tap into the power of this amazing legacy we have with the earth and with other animals, we need to break free from that patriarchal backstop there in history and start to push through that and see this long history of living cooperatively with other animals. Then we're starting to see some real magic to be made. So that is my hope with the book. I think that it is a feminist book. It is a feminist book. I use vegan feminist theory throughout the book, not just to critique that which is not serving, but to envision how we can use the tools of witchcraft and veganism to make a more sustainable and equitable type of living and a type of activism. So I hope you'll check it out. I'm very aware that this is a book from Routledge. Routledge is an academic press. It is designed, these books are designed primarily to go to university libraries, hence the price. And I'm not happy about that, but that's the nature of the game. When I'm in academia, I kind of get trapped into these. I'd like to publish a more popular press book on this topic in the future. But in the meantime, this is what I have. If you don't want to pay the price for this book, I don't blame you. What you can do is you can hop over to veganfeministnetwork.com, and there I publish pretty regularly, maybe once a month or so, blog posts that summarize quite a lot of the main ideas from this book. So you can still access some of my reading absolutely for free and don't have to actually buy the book. So thanks for watching it to the end of the video. If you are interested in learning more about vegan witchcraft, I have a whole channel on vegan witchcraft. And you can also check out my Instagram channel, which is my personal one, Corey Lee Wren, or I've set up one for my vegan witchcraft as well, so I can do more of this daily practice, daily creation of vegan witchcraft. And also you can sign up for my newsletter, but also you might want to check out some of the other videos here on this channel, because like I said, this is a vegan feminist project. On this channel, I'm talking all hot topics on vegan feminism and interviewing some of the most amazing, varied, and diverse people doing vegan feminist work. So there's lots here to learn from, and I'm so glad that you're here to be a part of it. And yeah, leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think, because this is not just me, myself, and I, my solitary journey. This is a community at work here. And I know this is my last thing I'll say about this. Ever since I became open about this project and what I hope to do, what I hope to achieve, so many people have reached out to me who also are vegan and also are interested in paganism or witchcraft. And I never would have known that because there's such a stigma around it. I never would have known that if I hadn't have opened up. So yeah, definitely use the comments section below and let me know what you think. Blessed be.